Kia ora, whakalofalahi atu, i o rana, mā lōlelei, talofalawa, kamna Māori, Nisam Bolimanaka, warm Pacific greetings. My name is Professor Yakoba Matapo and I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor Pacific, and I'll be walking you through the learning module today. We're going to be focusing on Pacific research design. Before we start the learning module today, we're going to open up with a Samoan proverb, a Samoan alanga upu. The intention is to set up a welcoming and safe space for exploration and learning. Our alanga upu today is e fili ele tai se angava'a, which is let the sea determine the worth of the canoe. Just like any good research design, Pacific research design requires careful attention, planning for the whole of lifespan of research. And as we walk through the principles today, I hope that this will be a guide for you as you strengthen your Pacific research design. Dr. Hilda Port, who is a senior lecturer in clinical sciences at AUT with expertise in psychology and neuroscience, shares, quote, Pacific research encompasses values that are needed in all aspects of research. Those values, those building of relationships, the respect, the reciprocity, all of those are invaluable in this space, close quote. This topic further explores Pacific research design and will support you to become familiar with AUT's Pacific research design process, identify and apply core principles guiding Pacific research, and identify opportunities to incorporate AUT's Pacific research design in your research plan. These readings and activities will be reviewed through this topic. Similar to the positionality activity, you will have a chance to reflect on and apply core Pacific principles to your research design. The primary role of Pacific research is to generate knowledge and understanding about and for Pacific peoples and their environments with their active involvement as leaders, researchers, community advisors, participants and stakeholders, among other key roles. The Pacific research design approach moves away from outsider perspectives and towards Indigenous interpretations, aiming to be empowering for both researchers and the researched. For Pacific researchers, this process is never neutral or detached. Research is relational, reciprocal, and woven through ongoing ties to community, to place, and ancestral knowledge. Pacific research is not monolithic. It is decolonial in nature, values-based, and methodologically diverse. It recognizes that Pacific knowledge systems stand on their own without the need to reference to the West, and it is anchored by community voice and well-being. Research design is the overall strategy or blueprint for how a research study is conducted. It outlines what the researcher is trying to find out, how the researcher will approach the inquiry, and why the chosen methodologies and methods are best suited to the questions and aims of the study. In simple terms, research design is the plan for finding answers from the beginning to the end while honouring relationships, contexts and responsibilities embedded in the research process. Research design can be likened to the construction of a whale, a house. The blueprint is the research design, the foundation is the methodology, the tools and materials are the methods, the people and relationships involved are the participants and advisors and communities. As Dr. Leon Usatini, a Senior Research Fellow at AUT notes, Pacific values can inform the entire research process. The Pacific Research Guidelines offer an opportunity to enact this, and the graphic on the slide demonstrates an overview of 5 stages of research design and notes opportunities to incorporate a Pacific approach. Now you can pause the video at this time and review each stage. Moving deeper into the 5 stages, this slide demonstrates key components of the research design and reminds us to reflect on what is real for Pacific peoples, what is true according to Pacific practices and protocols, what is the value in Pacific knowledge and inquiry. We've discussed in-depth positionality and reflexivity. These components provide an opportunity to unpack and reflect on practical application in Pacific research design. These components should be familiar to you. The distinction is applying a Pacific lens and approach. The Pacific Research Guidelines presents 8 stages of research. We'll review each of these stages with a view towards incorporating Pacific principles and ensuring careful consideration and culturally sensitive approaches at each stage. Through the development of the guidelines, the principles of respect, reciprocity, holism, service, or research for good, relationality, te lewa, addressing diversity and integrity, transparency and accountability were identified as core to underpinning Pacific research design. Following a review of each stage of the research design, you will have an opportunity to participate in a reflective activity, working to apply these principles to your context. Stage 1 focuses on methodologies, research topics, and questions. It is important that research is community-driven and responsive to the priorities voiced by Pacific peoples and communities, while still being strategic in its approach to prioritizing resources and areas for investigation. Being strategic in approach is not synonymous with extractive research design. It is ensuring that methodologies are appropriate for the topic, research aims and Pacific priorities and its context. It is critical that the research topics have the appropriate resources and collective support to accomplish key research areas, and topics that are relevant to the aspirations of Pacific communities. Key practices to ensure alignment may include negotiating and refining the research topic to meet local Pacific community needs, priorities, and aspirations based on consultation, relevant literature, intra-team discussions and input from advisory groups and funders. The relevance of the final research questions to the concerns and aspirations of Pacific representatives remains an area of focus throughout all stages of the research process. Consultation is a vital, continuous, two-way communication process that begins early and extends throughout the project lifecycle, including dissemination. It is important to recognise that Pacific knowledge seeking, knowledge creation, and validation of knowledge in terms of rigour, credibility, and measure are not limited to the academy. This requires researchers to identify and consult with appropriate stakeholders, including, for example, community leaders, health providers, women, youth, church leaders, professionals, and academic colleagues. Face-to-face consultation is key for establishing meaningful relationships, as is allowing sufficient time for multiple meetings and negotiations. It should be kept in mind that consultation is not meant to be a burden on those who are consulted. Allow the time, commitment, and mode of engagement, whether it's online or in person, for consultation to accommodate the VAR, which is that relational space, of the individual or the group being consulted with. Consider establishing a Pacific Advisory Committee or reference group to enhance ongoing guidance and community checks. Ensure that language is not a barrier. Researchers fluent in the research group's language or languages can enhance the richness of Pacific research. Where feasible, ensure translation services are budgeted for and provided, considering linguistic and cultural nuances. Pacific management and control of the research project at all levels is important. It is preferable to include a Pacific researcher with clear roles and limitations for non-Pacific researchers. This requires researchers to ensure the research team reflects the communities involved in the study. This might include the involvement of New Zealand-born Pacific or island-born Pacific. Recruit and train culturally appropriate information collectors and analysts. Consider co-supervision agreements for postgraduate students undertaking research in Pacific countries. Navigating method with cultural care, Dr. Radilete Kamek, an Associate Professor and Deputy Associate Dean Pacific Advancement in our AUT Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences, reminds us that taboo subjects often make communities or Pacific peoples feel cautious or make them more careful in what they share and require more nuanced language that reflect cultural practices associated with the topic. For example, for topics around sexual intimacy, making considerations around gender and cultural, religious or spiritual factors often require more careful wording and thinking. When working with Pacific peoples, research design must move beyond technical accuracy to embrace cultural sensitivity. Whether using questionnaires, surveys, or qualitative topic guides, careful phrasing is essential to avoid offending cultural sensitivities, particularly for taboo subjects. From this foundation, several strategies can strengthen the cultural appropriateness of research tools. Qualitative topics need to offer flexibility for culturally sensitive framing. Pilots are recommended to test questions and gather feedback for refinement. and in some contexts, researcher-assisted techniques may be more effective than self-administered questionnaires, ensuring approaches maintain rigor while being responsive to cultural nuances. To remove prejudices and stereotypes, it is important that questionnaires are screened by people familiar with the community's culture. Sampling is critical for the overall usefulness and impact of the research findings. Oversampling may be necessary to achieve sufficient statistical power for separate analysis of specific data. To uphold both rigor and cultural respect, researchers are encouraged to balance the need to adequately address research questions with the need to respect the values and culture of potential participants. Ensure participants are representative of all key groups and knowledge holders within the community. Stage 6, Ethical Considerations in Design. Researchers should obtain ethics approval from relevant institutional committees, but beyond institutional approval, ethics must be lived out in the research relationship. Respect, protection, and transparency should be embedded throughout the research process. This means that informed and relational consent is a two-way process grounded in dialogue, trust, and goes beyond the act of signing a form. In some contexts, turning up can signal consent, but it remains essential that participants are provided with accessible information and opportunities to ask questions throughout the study. Researchers must recognise that information in Pacific communities is often shared verbally or relationally. The participants' privacy and confidentiality must be respected, and researchers should take care to uphold participants' dignity when handling sensitive knowledge. Safeguarding participants' well-being means ensuring research does not cause harm. While additional care may be needed for children, youth, women, disabled peoples, or those with lived experiences of violence, it is equally important to acknowledge that Pacific peoples have historically faced discrimination in education, in health, and social services. So this context makes many Pacific participants vulnerable in spaces where power is unequally exercised. As a baseline, researchers should actively uphold the safety, the dignity, and mana of all Pacific participants. Researchers are encouraged to develop a deeper understanding of Pacific communities, approaching their work in ways that recognize the diversity and richness of Pacific identities without essentializing or reducing them to a single narrative. While many Pacific peoples may share values such as spirituality or ancestral connection, these are not universal. Researchers can reflect this diversity in the language they use in their project through qualifiers such as many or some. They should recognize that there is a plurality of Pacific experiences shaped by migration, urbanization, and personal beliefs. So in this sense, Pacific research identities are woven into a collective rather than representing a singular voice. To ensure this, researchers need to conduct literature reviews and engage with experts to understand cultural psychology, social structure, normative values, and expectations of specific communities. It is key that researchers acknowledge intra-communal diversity and practice cultural sensitivity in all interactions. Design questions that reflect that diversity within Pacific ethnic groups may include gender, age, education, language, religion, socioeconomic class, to name a few. They shape worldviews and identities. Be mindful of words, mannerisms, and body language to avoid offence. One of our Pacific postgraduate students shared, quote, "For me, when I go back home to Samoa, I am the outcome," close quote. This statement speaks to the heart of Pacific research. It must be lived, embodied, and returned to communities. Research involving Pacific peoples must go beyond observation. It must improve lives, inform policy, and build pathways for change. To honour this, researchers can build Pacific research capacity and capability through mentoring, training, employment, and formal qualifications. Ensure accessible and reciprocal dissemination, including returning to villages and communities to gift findings in meaningful formats. Organising a whānau or community meeting is an effective way to share outcomes. Timing, location, and budgeting for catering and dissemination must be thoughtfully planned. Using Pacific media and social platforms wisely, tailoring messages to each audience. Communicating findings through media, including social media, requires a clear, engaging approach that resonates with non-academic audiences. Short bursts of information paired with strong imagery can be powerful tools for engagement and storytelling. Embed feedback and validation from participants and advisory groups throughout the research process. Catalyze action, not just analysis. Similarly to the positionality activity, we will now work to apply the core principles to your research design. You can download the form on the Canvas page applying specific principles to your research design to guide this process. The first step is to identify a research project or a course or teaching or postgraduate student you're supervising. You may choose the same example you chose for the positionality activity or identify a new one. As we move through the sections, pause the video and reflect on the questions. Note that if it is difficult to apply the principles, that may be an indication that this topic may be not for you at this time. This slide focuses on respect as a core Pacific research value. Respect is shown through the way we build relationships, engage knowledge holders, follow cultural protocols, and honour intellectual and cultural property. In practice, this means approaching people with humility, listening carefully, and creating trust throughout the research process. It also means being clear about who holds knowledge in this space and how we will engage with them and how cultural practices will guide that engagement. An important part of respect is ensuring that participants remain the primary owners of the knowledge they share. The table prompts us to think practically about what respect looks like in action across each of these areas. This slide focuses on reciprocity as a key value in Pacific research. Reciprocity asks us to think carefully about mutual benefit throughout the research process. This includes how knowledge is shared, how time and service are acknowledged, and how findings are returned in ways that are accessible and meaningful to participants and communities. The table invites us to plan for reciprocity in practical ways, from exchange of information to appropriate gifts or forms of service through the dissemination of findings. Holism reminds us to understand research in an interconnected way, where physical, social, environmental, cultural, and spiritual dimensions all matter. It also asks researchers to show up as whole people with authenticity and care and to engage respectfully in community life where appropriate. The prompt here encourages us to think about how we can participate meaningfully in the lived realities connected to our research topic, so our understanding is grounded, relational, and culturally responsive. Here we focus on service or research for good as a core commitment in Pacific research. It reminds us that research should support the well-being of Pacific peoples, their knowledge and their environments. This means being clear about the positive impact the research will have as defined by the communities involved and how the work will continue to contribute to the mana-enhancing outcomes. It also asks us to think carefully about any aspect of the research that may diminish mana, or how these will be addressed with care and responsibility. Here we focus on te oleva, or relationality, as a guiding principle in Pacific research. It reminds us that research relationships need care, time, humility, and trust across the whole process and often beyond the life of the project. This means paying attention to the key relationships involved and being intentional about how we nurture those connections. It also asks us to consider what may place strain on the bar and how we can reduce burden and move in ways that protect the relational space. This slide highlights the importance of addressing diversity within Pacific research. Pacific communities are diverse with different cultures, languages, histories, and lived realities, so our research approaches need to reflect that complexity. This means thinking carefully about ethnic-specific contexts as well as differences within communities such as age, gender, migration, histories, and mixed heritage identities. The prompt here is asking us to deepen our understanding of the wider social, cultural, political, and historical context shaping the topic we're exploring. Integrity, transparency, and accountability are essential to how Pacific research is carried out. The focus here is on being clear about the purpose of the research, the positive outcomes it seeks to support for Pacific peoples and environments, and any risks that need to be identified and addressed with care. It is also highlighting the importance of honest reporting with community checks and feedback built into the process so the work remains responsible and answerable to all of those involved. These closing questions invite us to pause and reflect on whether the research is genuinely grounded in Pacific values, relationships, and responsibilities. They ask us to consider whose voices are shaping the work, how data is being cared for, whether the research will strengthen Pacific knowledge community aspirations, and whether the process has made room for meaningful reciprocity and relational engagement. Taken together, this checklist is a way of asking whether the research is accountable to Pacific peoples and environments and is useful to communities and carried out with care across every stage of the journey. We'd like to warmly acknowledge the contributors to this module. Dr. Jessica Wirtschel, our learning module designer. We also acknowledge the AUT Moanador Governance Group, the Moanador Pacific Research Guidelines Working Group, led by Dr. Daisha Tunimo-Pea, and our ROs Claralyn and Waverley for their valuable contributions. Our thanks also to the creative designers, Cece and Kayani, who are both AUT alumni, for helping bring this module to life. You can reach out to me if you need any further support, and you can also access Pacific research resources through the Moanador website. Thank you so much for your engagement in these learning modules, and I wish you all the best with your journey through Pacific research.